Margaret Wilson was 69 years old when she crossed, in silence, the long hallways of Evergreen Care Center, located on the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona. She moved forward in a wheelchair pushed by a hurried aide, watching beige walls, identical doors, and fluorescent lights that made everything look colder than it should. The air smelled of disinfectant and distance. They had told her it would be temporary, just until things settled down. Still, Margaret felt that this goodbye carried a weight no one wanted to name. The room they gave her was small and clean, a narrow bed, a wooden nightstand, a small television fixed to the wall, and a window facing a dry courtyard with no flowers, no traffic noise, no familiar voices. Nothing resembled the modest house where she had raised her son after becoming a widow in her early 30s. Nothing reminded her of the neighborhood bakery she had run for decades, waking before dawn to knead dough and greet customers by name. Inside Evergreen, Margaret was no longer a woman with a past. She was a chart number and a schedule. As she unpacked with slow, uneven hands, her fingers stopped on a framed photograph. It showed her and her son, Daniel, smiling behind the bakery counter. He wore a flour-stained apron, his arm resting proudly on her shoulder. Margaret traced his face with her thumb. Since the stroke 2 years earlier, her world had been shrinking. She lost strength on the right side of her body, lost her independence, and not long after, lost Daniel in a sudden car accident that hollowed her from the inside out. Before the stroke, Margaret lived above the bakery in downtown Phoenix. She knew every regular customer, every story, every quiet struggle shared over coffee. The morning she collapsed in her kitchen, unable to speak or stand, marked the end of that life. There were hospital rooms, careful doctors, long therapy sessions filled with frustration. To pay for treatments, she sold the bakery she had built with her own hands. The only thing left was the old family house, rented out years before. Daniel insisted she move in with him, his wife, and their 2 teenage daughters in a newer suburb. At first, there was patience and good intentions. Over time, fatigue crept in. Sighs replaced smiles. Conversations happened behind closed doors. After Daniel's death, the house grew cold. Her daughter-in-law worked longer hours. The girls stayed in their rooms. Margaret learned to take up as little space as possible, afraid of becoming a burden. That was when Evergreen Care Center entered the conversation. A good place, they said, professional care, just for a while. Now, sitting alone on the edge of the bed, Margaret heard a deep bark echo down a distant corridor, strong, restless. She didn't know it yet, but that sound belonged to someone just as forgotten as she was, and in that quiet moment, the routine she had accepted began to crack. The days at Evergreen Care Center passed slowly, each one blending into the next. Margaret woke early, accepted the meals placed on identical trays, and joined group activities only when gently pressed to do so. She listened more than she spoke. The staff was polite, efficient, but distant. At night, when the halls fell quiet, loneliness settled heavily on her chest. Phone calls from her daughter-in-law were short and practical, always rushed, always ending with promises that faded with time. One morning, while moving down a lesser-used corridor on her own, Margaret stopped in front of a large glass wall. On the other side was a small rescue wing connected to the facility. Volunteers walked back and forth, cleaning kennels, refilling bowls, speaking softly to the dogs. The sight stirred something familiar in her. She had always kept dogs when Daniel was young, loyal companions who asked for nothing but presence. For the first time since arriving, Margaret stayed somewhere by choice. A nurse named Claire noticed her interest and explained that some of the dogs were part of a companionship program for residents. Many seniors, she said, showed emotional improvement after spending time near the animals. Margaret listened, but her attention fixed on a kennel at the far end, set apart from the others. Inside lay a large dog with dark fur and alert eyes. Whenever someone approached too closely, he growled low, warning them away. His name was Max. He had once been a working dog used in private security. After a traumatic incident, he became reactive and was passed from shelter to shelter. Now he was isolated, labeled difficult, watched from a distance. Margaret felt no fear as she looked at him. What she felt was recognition. She too had once been strong, useful, needed. Now she was something to manage, something kept out of the way. From that day on, Margaret returned to the glass wall daily. She spoke quietly, not to anyone in particular. She talked about the weather, about the stiffness in her arm, about the bakery mornings she missed. Max listened, at first tense and unmoving, then calmer. One afternoon, she said his name out loud. He lifted his head and held her gaze. He did not growl. He stayed. As the days passed, the distance between them slowly closed. Margaret shared stories of Daniel, of laughter behind the counter, of loss that still took her breath away. Max began lying closer to the bars, his breathing steady. At the same time, the silence from her family grew louder. The realization settled in quietly. Her stay was not temporary. Like Max, she had been placed aside, expected to fade. But something inside her was waking up, and it refused to stay silent. By the third week at Evergreen Care Center, Margaret stopped pretending. The word temporary had been nothing more than a cushion to soften a final decision. No visits came. Messages were rare. When the phone rang, it was about paperwork, property matters, and arrangements already discussed without her. Her daughter-in-law spoke politely, efficiently, as if handling a task. Margaret listened in silence, feeling the quiet sting of being slowly erased from her own life. The weight of that truth settled deep in her body. Sleep became shallow. Mornings arrived heavy and colorless. Yet one part of the day still pulled her forward. Every afternoon, she rolled herself down the corridor to the rescue wing. There, Max was waiting. He no longer growled. He stood when she arrived, pacing once before settling near the kennel bars. In his steady gaze, Margaret felt something she had almost forgotten. She still mattered to someone. One stormy afternoon, dark clouds rolled over Phoenix earlier than expected. Rain hit the building hard, rattling windows and emptying the halls. Margaret was near the rescue wing when the lights flickered. A sharp smell, electrical and bitter, filled the air. Moments later, an alarm sounded, uneven and confusing. Thin smoke crept along the ceiling, spreading fast. Margaret called out, but no one answered. The rain outside drowned her voice. Dogs began barking, agitated and afraid. The smoke thickened, burning her eyes and tightening her chest. The source of the fire was directly above Max's kennel. He paced wildly, fear replacing all restraint. This was not aggression, it was panic, a feeling Margaret knew too well. Driven by instinct rather than strength, she pushed her wheelchair forward. Her lungs burned as she moved. A piece of ceiling collapsed ahead, blocking her path back. Trapped, she tried to stand, but her legs failed her. In that moment, the helplessness of her stroke returned in full force. She was stuck, surrounded by smoke, waiting. Then came a loud metallic crash. Through the haze, a large shape burst forward. Max had broken free. He ran straight to her, grabbed the metal frame of the wheelchair, and pulled. Margaret coughed violently, reaching out to rest her hand on his head. He pulled again and again, dragging her inch by inch as the fire spread behind them. Shouts echoed in the distance. Hands joined the effort. Together, they reached clean air just as part of the ceiling collapsed where they had been moments before. Margaret felt the world fade. The last thing she saw was Max standing guard beside her, steady and unafraid. In her darkest moment, she understood the truth. Neither of them was broken beyond repair. They were wounded, not worthless. And when everything fell apart, they had saved each other.
Margaret woke in a hospital room filled with quiet beeping and pale morning light. Her chest felt tight, her throat sore, but she was breathing. A nurse noticed her open eyes and smiled, telling her she was safe. The fire had been contained before reaching the main building. Everyone had survived. As the fog in her mind cleared, Margaret asked the only question that mattered to her. Max was alive. He had inhaled smoke and injured his paws while breaking free, but he had recovered. What stunned everyone was what he had done. The dog labeled dangerous had escaped confinement, alerted staff, and pulled a resident to safety. His actions changed everything. Staff spoke of him with respect. Volunteers stopped calling him difficult. Margaret closed her eyes and cried, not from fear, but from relief and validation. During her recovery, visitors came who had never spoken to her before. Nurses, aides, volunteers, even local reporters wanted to hear her story. For the first time since her stroke, Margaret felt visible, not pitied, seen. That attention awakened a strength she thought she had lost. She began asking questions, making decisions, claiming her voice. With the help of a social worker, Margaret reviewed her situation. She learned that the family home was still legally hers, and no decision could be made without her approval. When her daughter-in-law finally came to visit, her tone was softer, uncertain. Margaret listened calmly and for the first time said no. Not out of anger, but dignity. She chose to decide her own future. Weeks later, Evergreen Care Center reopened fully. Margaret returned, but she was no longer the quiet woman in the corner. She joined discussions, shared stories, laughed again. Every afternoon, she sat in the courtyard with Max resting beside her. He was no longer isolated. He became part of the companionship program, gentle and attentive, always close to her. Margaret learned that aging does not mean disappearing, that fragility does not erase worth. Sometimes all it takes is being truly seen for life to change direction. Max found peace when he was trusted. Margaret found strength when she was heard. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Your story matters too. Follow the channel for more reminders that it is never too late to begin again.